Tonight, planning a new strategy for Afghanistan. The president consults congressional leaders as he prepares to convene his war council, including the Secretary of State. Do you think the situation is deteriorating in Afghanistan? I'm Katie Couric. Also tonight, the top U.S. commander says time is running out. Why General Stanley McChrystal believes he has only a year to turn the war around. Also, Lara Logan on America's missed opportunities and the resurgence of the Taliban. And the town that may be a model for how to defeat the enemy and win the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. As we bring you special extensive coverage of Afghanistan, the road ahead.
This is the CBS Evening News with Katie Couric.
Good evening, everyone. Once again, we're devoting the entire broadcast to one of the most critical issues facing this country, the war in Afghanistan. President Obama called in congressional leaders of both parties today, and tomorrow, the 8th anniversary of the war, he'll meet with his war council. Chip Reid begins tonight's coverage with a look at what the president is facing.
President Obama is now struggling with one of the most agonizing decisions of his presidency, whether to order a major troop buildup in Afghanistan. The mission, he said today, is clear:
to disrupt and dismantle and defeat al-Qaeda.
But top advisors are divided on how to do it. General Stanley McChrystal says he needs up to 40,000 more troops to defeat the Taliban and stabilize the country. Vice President Joe Biden and others want a narrower mission, focused on hitting al-Qaeda in their mountain hideouts using special forces and pilotless drones. About 30 leading members of Congress conferred with the president today. Some Democrats worry about a Vietnam-like quagmire.
The troops deserve a strategy that is every bit as good as the sacrifice they're being asked to make.
But most Republicans fear holding back on troops will lead to defeat.
I'm very convinced that General McChrystal's analysis is not only correct, but should be employed as quickly as possible.
Tomorrow, the president holds another long meeting with top advisors on Afghanistan. A final decision isn't expected for several weeks. The White House says it's just too important to rush. Katie?
Chip Reid at the White House tonight. Thank you. In Afghanistan today, U.S. and Afghan forces were hunting the militants who attacked a remote American outpost in Kamdesh over the weekend, killing 8 U.S. soldiers. 6 of the fallen heroes were returned home today in a solemn ceremony at Dover Air Force Base. Sergeants Joshua Kirk and Vernon Martin, Specialist Christopher Griffin, Stephen Mace, and Michael Scusa, and Private First Class Kevin Thompson. As the U.S. toll in Afghanistan continues to rise, 869 dead in 8 years of war, and this the deadliest year yet. I talked today with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton about how she sees the road ahead. Do you think the situation is deteriorating in Afghanistan?
I think it's mixed. I think that certainly, as we've now seen, General McChrystal's assessment was that it is deteriorating, that the Taliban have the momentum, that they are much more aggressive, they are better equipped, they are moving more broadly in the country than they had been before. At the same time, I think there are some positive developments that may not get the attention because they're not in the headlines. Many more people, particularly children, women, girls, are back in school, they get health care. But I don't doubt that left to their own devices, the Taliban forces, supported and encouraged and to some extent empowered by the ideology of standing against the foreign occupiers and standing up for Islam, would give the Taliban a real burst of energy to go even further. And that's what we have to decide how to prevent.
I asked the Secretary how much longer the U.S. may be in Afghanistan. We'll have that part of the interview later in the broadcast. But first, there's a reason Afghanistan is known as the graveyard of empires. No superpower has ever won a war there. The British tried, so did the Russians, which is how the U.S. first got involved. When the Soviet Union invaded in 1979, a group of Afghan Muslims declared a holy war. They were known as the Mujahideen.
The term Mujahideen derives from the word jihad, the holy struggle.
They shared a common enemy with the United States, and both the Carter and Reagan administrations gave the Mujahideen $3 billion in military aid to fight the Soviets.
Any form of assistance that they could think of, the United States administrations provided.
All while the Mujahideen were celebrated as freedom fighters, standing shoulder to shoulder with James Bond and Rambo. The Soviets withdrew, defeated in 1989. But the Mujahideen could not secure peace. The country quickly disintegrated into civil war. And with the Russians gone, the Americans lost interest in Afghanistan.
We withdrew, and we left the problems of a well-equipped, fundamentalist, ideological and religious group that had been battle-hardened to the Afghans and the Pakistanis.
The most militant extremist faction of the Mujahideen turned into the Taliban.
The Taliban emerged as this kind of altruistic group which wanted to bring peace to Afghanistan, and initially they were very popular.
But the Taliban's fight to be more powerful than the Mujahideen cost money, and a wealthy Saudi Arabian exile in need of safe haven stepped up as the Taliban's banker.
Osama bin Laden provides the money, fighters, reconstruction efforts, so he's a great asset to them.
Less than a month after the 9/11 attacks, President Bush issued an ultimatum to the Taliban: turn over Osama bin Laden or face the consequences.
None of these demands were met, and now the Taliban will pay a price.
Although the U.S. and its Afghan allies did topple the Taliban, a fateful strategic error cost the coalition its prize. In November 2001, bin Laden was cornered in the Tora Bora Mountains along the Pakistani border. But the U.S. chose not to act and instead outsourced the capture of the al-Qaeda leader to local Afghan militias. Bin Laden escaped, and the trail's been cold ever since.
Bin Laden is still in hiding somewhere in the mountains, either in Afghanistan or in Pakistan's tribal region. The locals won't give him up, not even with a $50 million bounty on his head. Tora Bora was a missed opportunity for the U.S., but it wasn't the last. From Kabul, here's Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Lara Logan.
The fall of Kabul in 2001 was greeted with jubilation, the momentum then with the U.S. But reluctant to commit its own troops, the U.S. allowed Osama bin Laden to escape from the Tora Bora Mountains. Then, what many here see as the gravest error of all.
Afghans were wary as the U.S. turned its attention to invading Iraq, and they were right. Everything from reconstruction and aid to the fight itself suffered as the U.S. shifted its resources and its focus away from Afghanistan and the commitment it had made to the Afghan people.
Not surprisingly, Afghan support for the war began to fade.
What was lost in Afghanistan with the U.S. focusing on Iraq?
The greatest opportunity, the best opportunity for stabilization of Afghanistan.
That lost opportunity has led the U.S. into a fight that would have been unimaginable 8 years ago when the Taliban collapsed in disarray. Back then, valleys like this in northeastern Afghanistan were peaceful. The U.S., believing their enemy was defeated, put few military assets on the ground. Another grave mistake. Now even the most remote mountains are killing grounds for determined Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters, no longer afraid to stand and fight whenever they choose.
Go! Come on, come on, come on!
Year after year, the U.S. blindly claimed success and failed to adjust its strategy or admit its enemy was getting stronger. The fighters it faced became proficient in small unit tactics, which they learned from studying U.S. troops. That can be seen in this Taliban propaganda video, which shows how the Taliban execute an attack on a small U.S. combat outpost. Loaded with ammunition, Taliban fighters climbed to the highest reaches of these mountains. They began their assault before first light, using the type of overwhelming fire usually used against them by the U.S. Their commander is so certain of victory that he orders his fighters to open fire on the jets when U.S. air support is called in. Taliban, stay in your places, he commands. If the jet comes down again, shoot the wings. With a huge fire raging, the Taliban wait for survivors to stumble out. 12 Afghan soldiers captured, 3 U.S. Marines killed. The U.S. counterattacked, and 3 days later the abandoned post was recaptured. But forcing an American withdrawal was a victory for the Taliban, a sign of how far they've come since the U.S. thought they were defeated.
Defeat is a very strong word. Will you ever defeat an insurgency in total?
Will you?
Well, it's challenging. I think you got to get it to a moderate level of chaos, a level that's accepted.
An acceptable level of chaos may not be what the U.S. went to war in Afghanistan hoping to achieve. But it may be how success is measured if it's enough to stop al-Qaeda from threatening the U.S. again. Lara Logan, CBS News, Kabul.
General Stanley McChrystal says success will require tens of thousands of additional troops and a new way of operating. Defense Secretary Robert Gates made it clear this week he doesn't want the general saying that or giving any other opinions in public anymore. But just a few weeks ago, McChrystal talked freely with our David Martin in Kabul, Afghanistan, about what he believes it will take to win. And tonight, David has portions of that 60 Minutes interview that haven't been seen before.
After 8 years of fighting, the clock is running out for the U.S. in Afghanistan.
Is this our last chance? I believe it's our most important chance now. You can never say there wouldn't be another, but I wouldn't count on one.
Everybody knows General Stanley McChrystal wants more troops. But when he spoke with 60 Minutes in August, he made clear more troops alone will not defeat the Taliban.
We're going to change the way we operate.
Change the way you operate. What do you mean?
Connecting with the people in a way that the people don't believe that you're an outsider or an occupier.
McChrystal wants to see less of this and more of this.
Tell him that right now it is not safe for them to walk over there. They have to come with us. Tell them the Taliban has guns all over there.
But he knows American troops, whether they're protectors or occupiers, can't win this war by themselves. He needs to vastly increase the size of Afghan forces.
I'm recommending about a total of 400,000 people between the Army and the police.
That's doubling.
It is.
How long is it going to take to do that?
Well, it'll take us longer than I'd like.
But McChrystal believes he only has 12 months to turn this war around. And that's not time enough for the Afghan government of Hamid Karzai to put its house in order.
There's corruption in the Afghan government at senior levels.
When U.S. Marines launched an offensive into Helmand province in southern Afghanistan, the stated goal was to cut off the Taliban from their primary source of money, the annual poppy crop. But McChrystal's deputy, Lieutenant General David Rodriguez, told us there was a second objective.
It's not only the drug money for the Taliban, it's also some corruption that's in the Afghan leadership in part of their government, their security forces too, for that matter.
So the operation in Helmand is denying both the Taliban drug money and government officials drug money.
It's a balance of both.
Rodriguez himself is a change in the way the U.S. is fighting this war. Incredibly enough, this is the first time a single commander has been in charge of day-to-day operations throughout the entire country.
So you're the guy that's going to be running the war on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, pretty much, yes.
What American forces need most in Afghanistan, says Major General Mike Flynn, McChrystal's top intelligence officer, is a few quick wins, by which he means not military victories, but convincing Afghans they will be better off siding with the U.S. than with the Taliban.
What we've got to do in 12 to 18 months is just show that we basically know what we're doing out here. There's some glimmers of success that we need to show. There's some perceptions that we need to change.
8 years of fighting, and the U.S. is still looking for glimmers of success. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Now, there is a success story in the making. U.S. Marines take back a town from the Taliban, but now the hard work really begins. 3 months ago, in the brutal heat of summer, thousands of U.S. Marines stormed into southern Afghanistan, determined to kick the Taliban out of Helmand province. It wasn't the first coalition attack in that region, but this time the Americans intend to stay and rebuild. Terry McCarthy reports from Nawa.
This used to be Taliban country. Under their rule, schools and stores were shuttered, and few dared to drive on the roads. Farmers who used to grow corn and wheat were pushed into the opium trade. This farmer says the Taliban forced him to grow poppies. Today, Nawa tells a different story. The streets are coming back to life. Everything changed on July 2nd when US Marines launched one of the biggest military offensives to date in Afghanistan. 4,000 Marines fanned out across Helmand province as part of Operation Strike of the Sword. Nearly 1,000 of those troops flew into Nawa that night, routing hundreds of Taliban in less than 24 hours.
We did the clear as quickly as we could. We didn't injure a lot of innocent people, and we didn't destroy a lot of infrastructure to do it.
The Marines have pushed them out, but if local government doesn't step in and significantly improve people's living standards, it's only a matter of time before the Taliban comes back. The Taliban has regrouped 7 miles to the northwest, and the Marines still have regular firefights with them.
Well, yeah, it's still a very big issue.
But already USAID has brought in a new weapon, 26-year-old civilian Scott Dempsey.
Walk down and find the different problems that are on the canal?
His job, to win over the locals by helping to fix what's broken, making roads passable, repairing irrigation canals, and most of all, turning on cell phone service, despite Taliban threats to blow up the towers.
And the cell phones don't work here because the Taliban don't want them to work.
So that's a power play that the Taliban has.
Other things are working. The road to the closest city, Lashkar Gah, is open again. The village even has its first freezer. And shop owners say business is better now that the Americans have come. This is the new approach to counterinsurgency, and it has a high price in money, time, and personnel. On this day, Dempsey is hoping to involve Afghans in repairing this road. They're haggling over the cost of labor.
40K. Okay. That's a very high price.
The Marines have 1,000 men to rebuild and protect Nawa, one small district of 100,000 people. But at current troop levels, the US simply cannot replicate the Nawa model of counterinsurgency in all of Afghanistan's trouble spots. The district governor is afraid of what would happen if the US left here too soon. He compares the Taliban to an infection that could easily grow back again.
Because Afghans have been through 30 years of warfare, they've seen it all, and so they want a assurance by us that we're going to stay, and that will only happen through time.
Ultimately, Dempsey can't give that assurance. For now, Dempsey and the villagers are just living one day and one ditch at a time. Terry McCarthy, CBS News, Nawa, southern Afghanistan.
A recount continued today in Afghanistan's disputed presidential election. Preliminary results after the voting took place nearly 7 weeks ago showed incumbent Hamid Karzai was the winner. But then came allegations of massive fraud. In my interview today with Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, I asked her about America's relationship with Karzai. How can the U.S. stand behind a president who is so mistrusted by so many of the people in the country? Isn't that a bad partnership?
You know, Katie, we're going to have to expect a lot more. And I have known and worked with President Karzai since 2003, I guess.
Are you terribly disappointed in him?
Well, I believe that some of what we're seeing is endemic. You know, we deal with a lot of countries where the governments either don't have the capacity or are plagued by corruption, cannot deliver for their people. And we know that we have to figure out how better to work with them. And at the end of the day, the people of Afghanistan have to believe that they have a government that's on their side.
But they
Otherwise,
don't.
Well, some do and some don't. They don't think they have an alternative. They've got to believe that they're going to be protected. And in our conversations with people below the presidential level, people working in the national government and people down in the local areas, the village elders, they all say the same thing: help us to be able to protect ourselves and then leave.
But the question is, how long will it be before the U.S. can leave?
I consider it development.
The administration is offering no timetable as the conflict enters its 9th year.
We have to figure out how much patience we have and what sacrifices we're willing to make. I mean, you know, we still have troops in Europe and we still have troops in South Korea. And a lot of the governments that we have supported with that kind of very heavy footprint, as well as financial aid and development and all the rest, in the last 50 or 60 years, took a while to evolve.
We may have a limited presence there for many years.
Well, I think I'm not going to characterize what our presence is, but I think it's important for us in the government to make the case to the American people that when we have horrible tragedies like what happened at Wanat or this recent terrible ambush and killing of our American soldiers of the last week, that this, as painful and horrible as it is, does have a direct relationship to protecting our country, our interests, and our allies, and our way of life. And I think that's, you know, that is a case that has to be made, and it's up to the American people to decide whether they agree with it, and it falls on the president to make the decision about how we proceed.
We'll be right back. Afghanistan, the road ahead continues tomorrow. Pakistan is a key ally in the war on terror, so why has it been a safe haven for terrorists? Plus, the new threat to U.S. troops, high-tech bombs made in Iran, and chilling and moving accounts from our correspondents back from the war zone. For all of the stories in this series, you can go to cbsnews.com and click on Afghanistan, the road ahead. And that is the CBS Evening News for tonight. I'm Katie Couric. Thanks for watching. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.